How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This book is a practical guide on how to win friends and influence people. So if you ain't got no friends, this is the book for you. Part 1. Fundamental Techniques in Handling People. Chapter 1. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. On May 7th, 1931, New York City witnessed the most sensational manhunt the old town has ever known. After weeks of search, Two-Gun Crawley, the killer, the gunman who didn't smoke or drink, was at the bay trapped in his sweetheart's apartment on West End Avenue. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege on the top floor hideaway. Chopping holes in the roof, they tried to smoke out Crawley, the cop killer, with tear gas. Then they mounted their machine guns on the surrounding buildings, and for more than an hour, one of New York's fine residential areas reverberated with cracks of pistol fire and rat-tat-tat of machine guns. Crawley, crouching behind an overstuffed chair, fired incessantly at the police. 10,000 excited people watched the battle. Nothing like it had ever been seen before on the sidewalk of New York. When Crawley was captured, Police Commissioner Mulroney declared that the two-gun desperado was one of the most dangerous criminals ever encountered in the history of New York. He will kill, said the commissioner, at the drop of the feather. But how did Two-Gun Crawley regard himself? We know, because while the police were firing into his apartment, he wrote a letter addressed to whom it may concern. And he wrote, the blood flowing from his wounds left a crimson trail on the paper. In his letter, Crawley said,
"Under my coat is a wary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm."
A short time before this, Crawley had been having a necking party on the country road of Long Island. Suddenly, a policeman walked up to the parked car and said, "Let me see your license." Without saying a word, Crawley drew his gun and cut the policeman with a shower of lead. As a dying officer fell, Crawley leaped out of his car, grabbed the officer's revolver, and fired another bullet into the prostrate body. But that was the killer who said,
"Under my coat is a wary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm."
Crawley was sentenced to the electric chair. When he arrived at the death house at Sing Sing, did he say,
"This is what I get for killing all the people"?
No, he didn't. He said,
"This is what I get for defending myself."
The point of the story is this. Two-Gun Crawley didn't blame himself for anything. Is that unusual attitude among criminals? Nah, it ain't. And it is not only for criminals. Most people are like this. This is my interpretation. Nobody sees themselves as the villain. Everyone sees themselves as the hero. They ain't doing nothing wrong. They just doing their own thing. I'm gonna do my own thing. Like Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse. Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing. See? He ain't the villain. He might be the villain to some other people, but he don't see himself as the villain. Another example. You've heard of Al Capone. This is what he said. "I have spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse, the existence of a haunted man." That's what Al Capone said. Al Capone, America's public enemy #1. The most sinister gang leader who ever shot up Chicago. Capone doesn't condemn himself. He actually regards himself as a public benefactor, an unappreciated and misunderstood benefactor to the public. And so did many other criminals. So what did you learn from the first chapter? In everyone's own story, they're the hero, so don't judge them. What right do we have? What right do you have? What do you... Don't judge them. Just see it as it is. It is what it is. Use that mentality. As Dr. Johnson said, God himself, sir, does not propose to judge a man until the end of his days. Why should I? Why should you? Chapter 2. The big secret of dealing with people. There is only one way under the high heavens to get anybody to do anything. Did you ever stop to think that? Yes! one way. And that is by making the other person want to do it. Remember, there is no other way. Of course, you can make a man want to give you his watch by sticking a revolver in his ribs. You can make an employee give you his cooperation until your back is turned by threatening to fire him. You can make a child do what you want to it. You can make a child do what you want it to do with a whip or a threat. But these crude methods have sharply undesirable repercussions. The only way I can get you to do anything is by giving you what you want. And what do you want? The famous Dr. Sigmund Freud of Vienna, one of the most distinguished philosophical psychologists of the 20th century, says that everything you and I spring from two motives: the sex urge and the desire to be great. Professor John Dewey, America's most profound philosopher, phrases it a bit differently. Dr. Dewey says the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important. Remember that phrase, the desire to be important. It is significant. You're going to hear it a lot about this in this book. What do you want? Not many things, but a few things that you do wish, you crave with an incessance that will not be denied. Almost every normal adult wants health, food, money, sleep, life, sexy time, the well-bearing being of our children, a feeling of importance. It's 8, but it's really great. This is my interpretation. Everyone wants a feeling of importance. That is what makes even the monkeys. I was gonna say that is what makes the difference between humans and monkeys. But even monkeys want a feeling of importance. That's why they fight other monkeys, to get that feeling of importance, to get to the top. Everybody wants it. Dale Carnegie's father had a pig. And this pig was the best pig in the whole state of New Jersey. The fattest pig in the whole of New Jersey. And it won all the prizes. And guess what? It got a blue ribbon. You think the pig cared about the blue ribbon? Nah, but his father did, because the pig gave his father a sense of importance. For example, so you want someone to edit your photos. Give them a feeling of importance. Go to them. Ask them for help. Tell them, you're the best at editing photos. I need your help. I can't do it without you. And then ask for their help. They'll be happy to help. Why? Because you gave them a feeling of importance. You gave them a sense that they got the skills. And most likely nobody else is telling them they got the skills. But when you tell them they got the skills, they're like, yeah, I'll edit your photos for free. For free. See? Simple. Chapter 3. He who can do this has the whole world with him. And he who cannot walks a lonely way. I go fishing up in Marine every summer. Personally, I'm very fond of strawberries and cream, but I find that for some strange reason, fish prefer worms. Yes, fish prefer worms. So, when I go fishing, I don't think about what I want. I think about what they want. I don't bait the hook with strawberries and cream. Rather, I dangle a worm or a grasshopper in front of the fish and say, wouldn't you like to have a bite of that? Why not use the same common sense when fishing for men? That's what Lloyd George did. When someone asked him how he managed to stay in power after all the wartime leaders, Wilson, Orland, Chalmers, had been ousted and forgotten, he replied that if he is staying on top, might be attributed to one thing. It probably is to the fact that he learned it was necessary to bait the hook to suit the fish. Why talk about what we want? That is childish. Absurd. Of course, you are interested in what you want. You are eternally interested in it, but no one else is. The rest of us are just like you. We are interested in what we want. So, the only way on earth to influence the other fellow is to talk about what he wants and show him how to get it. Remember that tomorrow when you are trying to get somebody to do something, if for example, you don't want your son to smoke, don't preach at him. Don't talk about what you want, but show him that cigarettes may keep him from making the baseball team or the football team or being able to fight or winning the 100-yard dash. What he wants, not you. Sure, he don't care, but he wants what he wants. This is a good thing to remember regardless of whether you are dealing with children or calves or chimpanzees. For example, Ralph Waldo Emerson and his son one day tried to get a calf into the barn, but they made a common mistake of thinking only of what they wanted. Emerson pushed and his son pulled, but the calf did not do what they wanted. He just did what he wanted. So he stood his ground. He didn't move. He stiffened his legs and stubbornly refused to leave the pasture. The Irish housemaid saw the predicament. She couldn't write essays or books, but on this occasion at least she had more horse sense or half calf sense than Emerson had. She thought of what the calf wanted, so she put her maternal finger in the calf's mouth and let the calf suck her finger as she gently led him into the barn. Every act you ever performed since the day you were born is because you wanted something. How about this time you give £100 to the Red Cross? Yes, you wanted to give to charity. But you didn't give because you were being nice. You gave because you wanted to feel nice. So in interpretation, stop thinking of what you want. Think of what they want. Think of what's important to them. Not only will that make you stand out because everyone is thinking about what they want. Ooh, I want cake. Give me cake. But what did the bakers want? They want your money. So give them your money. Or they want a compliment. Let's be real. All these bakers do, they're like, oh, I do this. And at least give them the compliment for making that cake. Come on. That's what I think. Me personally. Hey, I'm just telling you. You ain't gonna listen. You ain't gonna listen. So anyway, think of what's important to the other person. That's all you need to know. Part 2. 6 ways to make people like you. Chapter 1. Do this and you'll be welcome everywhere. Why read this book to find out how to win friends? Why? Why not study the technique of the greatest winner of friends the world has ever known? Who is he? You may meet him tomorrow, coming down the street. When you get off within 10 feet of him, he will begin to wag his tail. If you stop and pat him, he will almost jump out his skin to show you how much he likes it. He likes it. And you know that behind the show of affection on his part, there is no ulterior motive. He doesn't want to sell you any real estate. He doesn't want to get your number. He doesn't want to get your Instagram. He doesn't want to marry you. He doesn't want to... Did you ever stop and think that the dog is the only animal that doesn't have to work for a living? A hen has to lay eggs. Yeah. Eggs. A cow has to give milk. Yeah, milk. A canary has to say, shut up, canary. But a dog makes its living by giving you nothing but love. When I was 5 years old, my father bought a little yellow-haired pup for 50 cents. He was the light and joy of my childhood. Every afternoon, about 4:30, he would sit in front of the yard with a beautiful eyes staring steadfast at the path. And as soon as he heard my voice or saw me swinging my dinner pile through the buckbrush, he was off like a shot, racing breathlessly up to the hill, greet me with leaps of joy and barks of sheer ecstasy. Tippy was my constant companion for 5 years. Then one tragic night, I shall never forget it. He was killed within 10 feet of my head, killed by lightning. Tippy's death was a tragedy of my boyhood. Tippy never read a book on psychology. You didn't need to. You knew by some divine instinct that one can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in the other person than one can make in 2 years by trying to get the other people interested in you. Let me repeat that. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in the other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get people interested in you. Yet I know that you people who blunder through life trying to wigwag other people into becoming interested in them, of course it doesn't work. People are not interested in you. They are not interested in me. They are interested in themselves. This is facts. Morning, noon, after dinner, breakfast, lunch, dinner. The New York Telephone Company made a detailed study on the telephone conversations to find out which word is the most frequently used. You guessed it! What did you guess? What did you guess? What did you guess? It is the personal pronoun I. It was 3,990 times in 500 telephone conversations. When you see a group photograph you were in, who's the picture you look at first? You look at yourself. You zoom in, so you see a picture, you get the picture. I'm looking clap today. Anyway, that's what you think. Unless you're like really pretty and then you're like, I'm looking good. If you think people are interested in you, answer this question. If you died tonight, how many people would come to your funeral? Why should people be interested in you unless you are not first interested in them? Reach for your pencil now and write a reply here. Just write it on paper. Okay, let's write it. I'll just say it. Why should people be interested in you unless you are first not interested in them? They shouldn't be. It's facts. They shouldn't be. There are a few people who will come towards you, but other than that, nah. If we merely try to impress people to get people interested in us, we will never have many true, sincere friends. Friends, real friends, are not made that way. Napoleon tried it, and in his long last meeting with Josephine, he said,
Josephine, I have been as fortunate as any man ever was on this earth, and yet at this hour, you are the only person in the world whom I can rely.
And history is doubt whether he could even rely on her. Damn. She was for the streets. Was she? Who's this Josephine?
Josephine, I know you need me. Josephine.
Interpretation. You need to be interested in other people before they get interested in you. It is simple. It is just facts. It's plain and simple. The only way people become interested in you is if you're interested in them. For example, unless you're some pretty looking woman, because then, obviously, when someone sees you, they're going to be like, ooh, yeah. And they'll be interested in you instant. But other than that, if you're like a normal person, you got to be interested in them first to get their interest back. It's just how it is. It is what it is. Chapter 2. A simple way to make a first good impression. I recently attended a dinner party in New York. One of the guests, a woman who had inherited money, was eager to make a pleasing impression on everyone. She had squandered a modest fortune on sables, diamonds, and pearls. But she hadn't done anything whatever about her face. She was ugly. It radiated sourness and selfishness. She didn't realize that every man knows, namely, that the expression a woman wears on her face is far more important than the clothes she wears on her back. Charles Schwab told me. His smile has been worth $1 million, and he probably underestimated the truth. For Schwab's personality, his charm, his ability to make people like him, was almost wholly responsible for his extraordinary success. And one of the most delightful factors in his personality is his captivating smile. I'm Charles Schwab! I once spent an afternoon in Missouri Chevalier, and frankly, I was disappointed. Glum, taciturn, he was sharply different from what I expected, until he smiled. Then it seemed as if the sun had broke through a cloud. If it hadn't been for a smile, Monsieur Chevalier would probably still be a cabinet maker back in Paris, following the trade of his father and brother. Actions speak louder than words, and a smile says, I like you. You make me happy. I'm glad to see you. That is why dogs make such a hit. They are so glad to see us, they almost jump out their skin. So naturally, we are glad to see them. An insincere grin? No, that doesn't fool anybody. We know it is mechanical and we resent it. I'm talking about a real smile, a heartwarming smile, a smile that comes from within, the kind of smile that will bring a good price in the marketplace. Your smile is getting sold and you're not giving the goodest price. So this is a smile. okay, that's a smile. This is a dead smile. Improve your smile. The employment manager at a large New York department store told me he would rather have a sales girl who hadn't finished grade school if she had a lovely smile than a doctor of a philosophy with a sour face. Yeah, he would rather have a pretty girl than an ugly doctor with crazy intelligence. What is this discrimination? It is what it is. Basically, one has a good smile, the other has no smile. He's this. I had to learn philosophy. So my interpretation, smile genuinely to make people like you. Smile with genuine intensity. Smile with genuine passion. Passion, compassion, there is no passion, there is no compassion, there is no... Yeah, smile with genuine. Smile genuinely. Be happy to see someone. For example, think of it like this. You're in an apocalypse. You haven't seen nobody in 10 years, and this is the first person you see. Think of it like that. Then you'll be like, oh, finally, I see you. And just smile like this. Wow. Yeah, smile genuinely. Chapter 3. If you don't do this, you are headed for trouble. And make it double. Team Rocket is Jesse and James. Back in 1898, a tragic thing happened in Rockland Country, New York. A child had died. On this particular day, the neighbors were preparing to go to the funeral. Jim Farley went out to the barn to hitch up his horse. The ground was covered with snow. The air was cold and sappy. The horse hadn't been exercised for days, and he was led out to the watering trough. He wheeled playfully, kicked both his heels high in the air, and killed Jim Farley. So the little village of Stony Point had 2 funerals that week instead of 1. Jim Farley left behind a widow and 3 boys and a few $100s in insurance. His oldest boy, Jim, was 10, and he went to work at a backyard wheeling sand and pouring it into molds and turning brick on the edge to be dried by the sun. This boy Jim never had a chance to get much education, but with his Irish genuinity, he had a flair for making people like him. So he went into politics, and years went by. He developed an uncanny ability for remembering people's names. Yeah, remembering people's names. He never saw the inside of a high school, but before he was 46 years of age, 4 colleges had honored him with degrees. He had become a chairman of Democrats National Committee and Postmaster General of the United States of America. I once interviewed Jim Farley and asked him about the secret of his success. He said hard work, and I said, don't be funny. He then asked me what I thought about the reasons of success. I replied, I understand you can call 10,000 people by their first names. No, you're wrong, he said. I can call 50,000 people by their first names. Make no mistake about it. That ability helped Mr. Farley to pump Franklin D. Roosevelt in the White House. During the years that Jim Farley traveled as a salesman for a gypsum concern, and during the years he held office as a town clerk in Stony Point, he built up a system for remembering names. In the beginning, it was a very simple one. Whenever he met a new acquaintance, he found out his complete name, the size of his family, the nature of his business, and the color of his political opinions. he got these few facts well in mind as a part of his picture. The next time he met them, even if the year later, he would be able to slap on the back, inquire about his wife and his kids, and ask him about the hollyoaks in the backyard. No wonder he developed a following. For months before Roosevelt's campaign president began, Jim Farley wrote 100 letters a day to people all over the western and northwestern states. Then he hopped on the train in a 19-day covered 20 states and 12,000 miles traveling by buggy, train, automobile, and skiff. He would drop into town, meet his people at lunch or breakfast, tea, dinner, and give them a heart-to-heart talk. Then he dashed over on another leg of the journey. As soon as he arrived back east, he wrote to one man in each town he had visited, asking for a list of all the guests whom he had talked to. The final list contained thousands and thousands of names, yet each person on that list was paid a subtle flattery of getting a personal letter from Jim Farley. These letters began, "Dear Bill" or "Dear Joe." They were always assigned Jim. Jim Farley discovered early in life that the average man is more interested in his own name than he is in other names, all the other names on earth put together. Remember that name and call it easily. You have paid him a subtle and very effective compliment, but forget it or misspell it, you have placed yourself at a sharp disadvantage. For example, once I organized a public speaking course in Paris and sent multigraph letters to all the American residents in the city. French typists were apparently little knowledge of English, filled in the names, and naturally they made blunders. One man, the manager of the large American bank in Paris, wrote to me in a scathing rebuke because his name had to be misspelled. My interpretation: remember people's names. You don't have to be like Jim Farley over here remembering 50,000 names. He was a big man, big brain. He had a lot of responsibilities. But you can do it simplified. All you gotta do is remember the people you meet on a daily basis or something, or the new people you meet. And there is a trick to learn people's names. So get their name, write it down. Okay, Jim Farley, and write it down 3 times. On your hand, paper, whatever. It don't matter if they see. If they see, just tell them, I'm smart like this. Write it down 3 times. Read it 3 times. Keep it on your hand. You'll remember it. Next time you see them, Jim Farley. Easy. Quick, simple hack. There you go. And use their name as often as you can, because people love using their names. Don't call in, hey, how you doing? Hey, what's up, Jim Farley? How you doing? Just say that, Jim Farley. People respond to their names. You've done this before. In the past, you've heard someone say something close to your name and you were like, oh, they said my name. They said my name. They didn't say your name. But that's psychology. Everybody likes their name. Name is them, and they like themselves. Unless they really hate themselves. They're like, oh. Even then, they'll notice the name. So use the name whenever possible, whenever you're speaking to someone. All right, Jim. What are you saying, Jim? Okay, Jim. Mala, Jim. You're fat, Jim. Get up, Jim. Damn, Jim. There you go. Chapter 4. An easy way to become a good conversationalist. I was recently invited to a bridge party. Personally, I don't play bridge. There was a blonde there who didn't play bridge either. She had discovered that I had once been Lowell Thornton's manager before he went on the radio, and I had traveled in Europe a great deal while helping him prepare the illustrated travel talks he was then delivering. So she said, "Oh, Mr. Carnegie, I do want to tell you about all the wonderful places you have visited. Are they the sights you have seen?" As we sat down on the sofa, she remarked that she and her husband had recently returned from the trip to Africa. "Africa!" I exclaimed. "How interesting. I always wanted to see Africa, but I never got there, except 24-hour stay once in Algeria. Tell me, did you visit the big game country?" "Yes." "How fortunate. I envy you. Do tell me about Africa." That was a good 45 minutes. She never again asked me where I had been or what I had seen. She didn't want to hear me talk about my travels. All she wanted was an interested listener, so she could expand her ego and tell me about where she had been. Was she unusual? No. Many people are like that. For example, I recently met a distinguished botanist at the dinner party given by J.W. Greenberg, the New York book publisher. I never talked to a botanist before and found him fascinating. I literally sat on the edge of my chair and listened while he spoke of hashish, and Luther Burbank and the indoor gardens, and told me astonishing facts about the humble potato. I have a small indoor garden of my own, and he was good enough to tell me how to solve some of my problems. As I said, we were at the dinner party. There must have been a dozen other guests. But I violated all the canons of courtesy and ignored everyone else and talked for hours to the botanist. Midnight came and I said goodnight to everyone and departed. The botanist then turned to our host and paid me several flattering compliments. I was most stimulating. I was this and I was that. And he ended up by saying, I was the most interesting conversationalist. An interesting conversationalist? Aye? Why? I had said hardly anything at all. I could have said anything if I had wanted to, without changing the subject, for I didn't know any more about botany than I know about autonomy or of a penguin. But I had done this. I had listened intensely. I had listened because I was genuinely interested, and he felt it. Naturally, that pleased him. That kind of listening is one of the highest compliments that we can pay anyone. Few human beings, wrote Jack Wardford in Strangers in Love, few human beings are proof against the implied flattery of rapt attention. I even went further than giving him rapt attention. I was hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise. I told him I had been immensely entertained and instructed, and I had told him I had wished that I had his knowledge, and I do. I told him that I should love to wander the fields with him, and I should. I told him I must see him again, and I must. And so I had him thinking of me as a good conversationalist, when in reality I had merely been a good listener and encouraged him to talk. My interpretation of this: you're sitting next to someone in school. They play football. Talk to them about football. You might not know anything about football. Good. Then you can ask them to tell you about football. They might think you're absolutely spasticated because you don't know anything about football. But still, go with it because you don't know anything about football. Be genuine with it. Don't lie. Be interested in people. And that is how you get the most conversation about them. Be genuinely interested in someone and ask questions which genuinely spike your curiosity. For example, if you don't know anything about football, what's the offside? I don't understand. Explain this. It don't make sense. I hate it. See? Now you want to tell me what offside is. I did not know, but I am genuinely interested. Obviously, I know because I'm not idiot. I know what an offside is. Anyway, be genuinely interested in people to be good at conversations. You don't need to be speaking, ooh, I did this. I'm so sick. Suck my dick. Everyone says that. Everyone's like, blah, 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 blah. Talk about the other person. Simple. The conversation will never end unless you have no other questions to ask or you ain't really interested. Let's be real. You next to someone and if you ain't really interested, forget about it because you don't really want to ask the right questions. But if you are interested in the person, ask them questions about themselves. Because they know everything about themselves. It's like a universe. Think of it like this. Each person is a universe, and you've never seen this universe before. And the only way to see into this universe is by asking them questions. So, to look into this universe, you ask them questions like, hey, where are you from? I'm from Wabalakapapa. And then you ask, where is Wabalakapapa? Simple. That's all it is.
Everybody wants kung fu fighting. I know what's fast as lightning. Everybody is a little bit frightening.
How to interest people. Chapter 5. How to interest people. Everyone who visited Theodore Roosevelt at Oyster Bay was astonished by the range and diversity of his knowledge. Whether it was a cowboy or a rough rider, a New York politician or a diplomat, wrote J. Man Bradford, Roosevelt knew what to say to him. And how was it done? The answer is simple. Whenever Roosevelt expected a visitor, he sat up late that night before reading up on the subject in which he knew his guest was particularly interested in. For Roosevelt knew, as all leaders know, that the royal road to a man's heart is to talk to him about the things he most treasures most. The royal road to a man's heart is to talk to him about things he treasures most. What do you treasure? Huh? Okay, I know what you treasure. You treasure your balls. So, when I come and speak to you, I'm going to talk to you about your balls. And then you'll be like, ooh, I like that. Come on, feel my balls. When I was 8 years old and I was spending a weekend visiting my Aunt Libby Lindsay at her home in Stratford-on-Hazeltine, a middle-aged man called one evening, and after a polite skirmish with my aunt, he devoted his attention to me. At that time, I happened to be excited about boats, and the visitor discussed the subject in a way that seemed to me particularly interesting. After he left, I spoke of him with enthusiasm. What a man! And how tremendously interested in boats. My aunt informed me he was a New York lawyer, that he cared nothing whatsoever about boats, took not the slightest interest in the subject. But why then did he talk to me all the time about boats? Because he's a gentleman. He saw that you were interested in boats. He talked about the things he knew you would be interested in and please you. He made himself agreeable. And William Leon Phillips adds, I'll never forget my aunt's remark. Damn that bitch. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. As I write this chapter, I have before myself a letter from Edward L. Chafe, a man active in Boy Scout work. One day I found I needed a favor, writes Miss Chafe. A big Scout jamboree was coming off in Europe, and I wanted the president of the largest corporation in America to pay the expenses of one of my boys for the trip. Fortunately, just before I went to see this man, I heard that he had drawn a check for $1 million, and that after it was cancelled, he had framed it. So, the first thing I did when I entered his office was to ask him about the check. A check for $1 million, I told him. I never knew anybody had written such a check. He don't know, Mr. Beast. And that I wanted to tell my boys I had actually seen a check for $1 million. He don't know, Mr. Beast. He gladly showed it to me. I admired it and asked him to tell me about how it happened to be drawn. You noticed, don't you, that Mr. Chef didn't begin by talking about his Boy Scouts or jamboree in Europe or what he wanted. He talked in terms of what interested the other man. Here is the result. Presently, the man I was interviewing said, "Oh, by the way, what was it you wanted to see me about?" So I told him. To my vast surprise, Mr. He granted me immediately what I asked for, but much more. I had asked him to only send one boy to Europe, but he sent 5 boys, and himself, and not himself, and myself, gave me a letter of credit for $1,000 and told us to stay in Europe for 7 weeks. He also gave me a letter of introduction to his branch president, putting them at our service, and he himself met us in Paris and showed us the town. Since then, he has given jobs to some of the boys whose parents were in want, and he's still active in our group. Yet I know if I hadn't found what he was interested in and got him warmed up first, I couldn't have found him 1/10 as easy as approach. My interpretation of that, speak to people about what they're interested in. Simple as that. You don't always have to get something from them. Just, you're in a sticky situation. You're next to someone you don't know. This is what you do. Speak to them about what they're interested in. Like I said before, football, basketball, Chinese football, Chinese basketball. Speak to them about that or where they're from. Be interested in what they're doing. Be interested in what they have. And they will be like, they'll in return be interested in you. Unless there's some dickhead and they'll be like, me, 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 me. And even then it's fine, because next time you see them, they'll be more inclined to speak to you, because they like when they spoke to you, because you gave them that feeling. You gave them that you gave them a drug. You infused drug into their bloodstreams. That drug is called dopamine. Don't take dopamine. All the self-improvement channels. Don't take dopamine. Dopamine's killing you. Dopamine. Shut up, dopamine. Yeah. Anyway, you give the other person dopamine, they'll be like, ooh, I like the taste of that. And they'll keep coming back. You're like an ice cream. They like ice cream. Unless there's some fatty, they'll like ice cream even more than that. Simple. So, speak to the other person about what they're interested in. Chapter 6. How to make people like you instantly. I was waiting in line to register a letter to the post office at 33rd Street and 8th Avenue in New York. I noticed that the registry clerk was bored with his job, weighing envelopes, handling out stamps, making changings, issuing receipts, and the same monotonous grind year after year. So I said to myself, I'm going to try and make that chap like me. Obviously, no homo. To make him like me, I must say something nice, not about myself, but about him. So I asked myself, what is there about him that I honestly admire? That is sometimes a hard question to answer, especially with strangers. But in this case, it happened to be easy. I instantly saw something I admired, no end. So, while he was weighing my envelope, I remarked with enthusiasm, I certainly wish I had a head of hair like you. He looked up, half startled, his face beaming with a smile. Well, it isn't as good as it used to be, he said modestly. I assured him that although it might have lost some of its pristine glory, nevertheless, it was still magnificent. He was immensely pleased. We carried on the pleasant little conversation, and the last thing he said to me was, many people have admired my hair. And you're not the first! No, he didn't say that. Whatever. I'll bet that chap went out to lunch that day walking on air. I'll bet he went home that night and told his wife about it. I bet he looked in the mirror that day and said, the beautiful full head of hair I have. I told this story once in public, and the man asked me afterwards, what did you want to get out of him? What was I trying to get out of him? What was I trying to get out of him? If we are so contemptibly selfish that we can't radiate a little happiness and pass on a bit of honest appreciation without trying to screw something out of some other person in return, if our souls are no bigger than sour crab apples, we shall meet with failure we so richly deserve. Oh yes, I did want something out of that chap. I wanted something priceless, and I got it. I got that feeling I had done something for him without being able to do anything whatsoever in return. This feeling that glows and sings in your memory long after the incident has passed. I'm going to tell you a story about a man who made an old granny very happy. So, this man and his wife were in Long Island to visit some of her relatives. She left him to chat with an old aunt of hers, and then rushed off by herself to visit some of her younger relatives. Since he had to make a talk on how he had applied the principles of appreciation, he thought he would begin with the old lady. So, he looked around the house to see what he could honestly admire. This house was built in 1890, wasn't it? He inquired.
Yes,
she replied.
That is precisely the year it was built.
It reminded me of the house in which I was born, he said. It is beautiful, well built, roomy. You know, they don't build houses like this anymore. He trying to smash. You're right.
You're right,
the old lady agreed.
The young folk nowadays don't care for beautiful homes. All they want is small apartments
and electric ice boxes and they go off getting about in their automobiles. "This is a dream house," she said in a voice reverberating with tender memories.
"This house was built with love.
"My husband and I dreamed about it for years before we built it. We didn't have an architect. We planned it all ourselves." Then she showed him about the house and expressed her hearty admiration for all the beautiful treasures she had picked up in her travels and cherished over a lifetime. Parsley shawls, an English tea set, Wedgwood china, French beds, chairs, Italian silk draperies that had once hung in French chateaux. After showing me through the house, said Mr. R, she took me to the garage. Here in my garage, there jacked up on blocks was a parked car, almost new. "My husband bought that car shortly before he passed," she said softly. "I have never ridden it since his death. You appreciate nice things. I am going to give you this car." "Why, Auntie?" he said. "You overwhelm me. I appreciate your generosity, of course, but I couldn't possibly accept it. I'm not even a relative of yours. I have a new car, and you have many relatives that would like to have that package." "Relatives?" she exclaimed. "Yes, I have relatives who just are waiting till I die so I can get that car. But they're not going to get it. If you don't want to give it to them, you can easily very well sell it to a second-hand dealer," he told her. "Sell it? Sell it?" she cried. "Do you think I would sell this car? Do you think I could stand a stranger riding up on this down the street in the car? That car is my husband. But for me, I wouldn't dream of selling it. I'm going to give it to you. You appreciate beautiful things." He tried to get out of accepting the car, but he couldn't without hurting her feelings. This old lady, left in a big house all alone with her parsley shawls, her French antiques, her memories, was starving for a little recognition. She had once been a young, beautiful, sought-after lady. She had once built a house warm with love and collected things from all over Europe to make it beautiful. Now, in an isolated loneliness of old age, she craved a little human warmth, a little genuine appreciation, and no one gave it to her. And when she found it, like spring and desert, her gratitude couldn't adequately express itself with anything less than a gift of a packaged car. How to make a woman fall in love with you. This is what this guy did with the granny. All you have to do is talk to the woman about herself. And the same technique works for men. "Talk to men about himself," said Dressley, one of the stupidest men who ever ruled the British Empire. "Talk to the man about himself, and he will listen for hours." So, my interpretation: make the other person feel important and do it genuinely, sincerely. This will make them like you. This will make them want to speak about themselves. This will stop conversations going dry where you're just like this. "Well, nice weather outside, isn't it?" This will stop conversations going to NPC lines. You understand? Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. Part 3. 12 ways to win people to your way of thinking. Chapter 1. You can't win an argument. Shortly after the close of the war, I learned an invaluable lesson one night in London. I was the manager at the time of Sir Ross Smith. During the war, Sir Ross Smith has been one of the Australian ace out in Palestine. And shortly after peace was declared, he astonished the world by flying halfway around in 30 days. No such feat had ever been attempted before. It created such a tremendous sensation. The Australian government gave him 50,000. The King of England knighted him, and for a while he was the most talked man under the Union Jack, the land bird of the British Empire. I was standing a banquet one night given in Sir Ross's honour, and during the dinner, The man sitting next to me told a humorous story which hinged on the quotation, "There's a divinity that shapes our end. Rough hew them how we will." The recounter mentioned that the question was from the Bible. He was wrong. I knew that. I knew it positively. There couldn't be the slightest doubt about it. And so, to get a feeling of importance and display my superiority, I appointed myself as an unsolicited and unwelcome committee for one to correct him. He stuck to his guns. "What? From Shakespeare? Impossible! Absurd!" That quotation was from the Bible, and I knew it. The storyteller was sitting on my right, and Mr. Frank Gammond, an old friend of mine, was seated on my left. Mr. Gammond devoted years of his life to study Shakespeare, but surprisingly, Mr. Gammond kicked me under the table. He said, "Dale, you're wrong. The gentleman is right. It is from the Bible." On the way home that night, Mr. Gammond grabbed me. "Frank, you know that quotation was from Shakespeare?" "Yes, of course," he replied. "Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 2. But we were guests at a festive occasion, my dear Dale. Why prove to a man he is so wrong? Is he going to make him like you? Why not let him save his face? He didn't ask for your opinion. He didn't want it. Why argue with him? Always avoid the acute angle. The man who said this is now dead. But the lesson that he taught me goes marching on." My interpretation of that: there is no benefit of getting in an argument. You ain't gonna make him like you. You ain't gonna make him be happy to see you. And the people around you ain't gonna be liking what they're hearing. Unless it's a fun argument where both parties ain't getting touched up. So, an argument. The only way to get the best out of an argument is to not have it. What's the point in an argument? You get an importance for 5 seconds. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're so right that you think that this man is wrong. But if he invited you to a place to eat and he's like, "Ooh, yeah, have this food, have this food," let him save his face. Let him do what he wants. It's not that deep. It's not that deep. Let him do his thing. Sure, he's wrong. But why does it matter? Most people don't know nothing. I don't know nothing. It don't matter. It's just have to have fun. He's just there to have fun. He having a good time.
I'ma slap a bitch down so quickly, hit her with the left, right, go down swiftly.
Avoid the argument when you can. There's no real reason to get an argument. You ain't gonna gain any friends. No point. Chapter 2. A sure way of making enemies and how to avoid it. When Theodore Roosevelt was in the White House, he confessed that he could be right 75% of the time. He would reach the highest measure of his expectations. If that was the highest rating that one most distinguished man of the 12th century could hope to obtain, what about you and me? If you can be sure of being right only 55% of the time, you can go down to Wall Street, make $1 million a day, buy a yacht, marry a chorus girl, and if you can't be sure of being right even 55% of the time, why should you tell the other person they're wrong? You can tell a man he's wrong by a look or an intuition or a gesture just as eloquently as you can in words. And if you tell him he is wrong, do you make him want to agree with you? Never. For you have struck a direct blow to his intelligence, his judgment, his pride, his self-respect. That will make him strike back, but it will never make him want to change his mind. You may hurl him with all the logic of Plato or Immanuel Kant, but you will not alter his opinion, for you have hurt his feelings. This facts. Because when you hurt someone's feelings, they still gonna disagree with you. Even if you're right, they're gonna be like, nah, I don't care, nah. And sometimes they might even punch you to tell you it's right. And if they're stronger than you, boom, you're on the floor. What are you gonna do? Tell them they're wrong? You're gonna get punched even more. You're gonna be like, no, you're right. Sure, maybe you're right. Maybe you can tell them that you're right. Maybe you got pure evidence. But don't argue about it. Tell them to them politely. Be like, hey, you might be correct, but I heard somewhere, babbly bibbly bobbly dabba do. Why she told she ba? The main thing they want is they want to be respected for their opinion. So, Show respect for the other person's opinion and never tell him he's wrong. That is my interpretation. You do what you want with it. You right. I might be wrong. Who knows? Chapter 3. If you're wrong, admit it. I live in almost the geographical center of New York. Yet within a minute's walk of my house, there is a wild stretch of virgin timber where the blackberry triggers form white in springtime, where the squirrels nest and rear their young, and the horseweeds grow as tall as horses' heads. This unspoiled woodland is called Forest Park, and it is a forest, probably not much difference in appearance from what it was the afternoon Columbus discovered America. I frequently go walking in the park with Rex, my little Boston Bulldog. He is a friendly, harmless little hound, and since we rarely meet anyone in the park, I take Rex along without a leash or a muzzle. One day, we encountered a mounted policeman in the park, a policeman itching to show his authority. "What do you mean by letting this dog run loose in the park without a muzzle or a leash?" he reprimanded me. "Don't you know it's against the law?" Yes, I know it is," I replied softly. "But I didn't think he would do any harm out here." "You didn't think?" "You didn't think?" "The law doesn't give a tinker's damn about what you think. That dog might kill a squirrel or bite a child. Now, I'm going to let you off this time. But if I catch you out here with your dog again, without a muzzle, without a leash, you have to tell the judge why you're so stupid." So anyway, he goes along his way. He starts bringing the dog out on the leash. Little Rex, he puts him on a leash. But after a week, he gets tired. He's like, no me gusta. So he goes back to the park without a leash or a muzzle. And guess what? One sunny evening, he saw the policeman in his way, and the policeman saw him, and they both crossed eyes. They were like, oh. I knew I was in for it. I knew it. So I didn't wait until the policeman started talking. I beat him to it. I said, "Officer, you've caught me red-handed. I'm guilty. I have no alibis, no excuses. You warned me last week that if I brought this dog out here again without a muzzle, you would fine me." "Well now," the policeman responded in a soft tone, "I know it's a temptation to let a little dog like that have a run out here when nobody's around." "Such is a temptation," I replied, "but it's against the law." "Well, a little dog like that isn't going to harm anybody," the policeman remonstrated. "No, but he may kill a squirrel," I said. "Well now, I think you're taking it a bit too seriously," he told me. "I'll tell you what, you just let him run over the hill where I can't see him, and we'll forget about it." That policeman, being human, wanted the feeling of importance. So when I began to condemn myself, the only way he could nourish his self-esteem was to take the magnanimous attitude of showing mercy. But suppose I tried to defend myself? Well, did you ever argue with a policeman? No. But instead of breaking laces with him, I admitted that he was absolutely right and I was absolutely wrong. I admitted it quickly, openly, and with enthusiasm. The affair terminated graciously by taking his side and his taking my side. Lord Chesterfester himself could hardly have been more gracious than this mounted policeman, who only a week previously had threatened to have the law on me. If we know we are going to get an old Harry anyhow, isn't it far better to beat the other fellow to it and do it ourselves? Isn't it much easier to listen to self-criticism than to bear condemnation from alien lips? Say about yourselves all the derogatory things you know the other person is thinking or wants to say or intends to say, and say them before he has a chance to say them, and you can take the wind out of his sails. The chances are 100 to 1 that he will make a gracious, forgiving attitude and minimize your mistakes, just as the mounted policeman did with me and Rex. My interpretation: if you're wrong, quickly emphasize it and admit to it. Simple. I've actually used this. So one time I was in the library and I got out a balloon. I blew it up and I popped it. Boom! Everyone's like, ah, ah, ah. Not police. Teacher comes in and she's like, "I could have had a heart attack." Obviously, I knew I was in the wrong, so she asked who did it, put my hands up, and I admitted it straight away with enthusiasm. So, she told me, blah, 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 and I said, I understand. And guess what? Nothing happened. Simple, no problem. She just wanted to be known. She just wanted to make sure that I understood that I was in the wrong. And I did, so she just let me go 5 seconds after. Simple. Chapter 4. The high road to a man's reason. If your temper is aroused and you tell him a thing or two, you'll have a fine time unloading your feelings. But what about the other fellow? What about the other fellow? Nobody cares about the other fellow. Will he share your pleasure? Will your belligerent tones, your hostile attitudes make it easy for him to agree with you? If you come to me with your fist doubled, said Woodrow Wilson, I think I can promise you that mine will be doubled as fast as yours. But if you come to me and say, let us sit down, take counsel together, and if we differ from one another, understand it is that we differ from one another just what the points at issue are. We will presently find that we are not so far apart after all, that the points on which we differ are few and the points on which we agree are many, and that if we only have the patience and candeur and desire to get together, we will get together. So basically he's saying, when you go up to someone to disagree with them, go calm, don't be spastic about it, and you shall be good. If you ever want to go into an argument, or for example, someone pushes in front of you in the line, don't go up to them like, hey, what the fuck, motherfucker, you fucking on me. Most of the time people just ignore it, I'll be real. They just give them dirty looks and just ignore it. But approach them in a friendly way. Be like, hi, excuse me, you pushed in front. Why? Ask them why. If they got a valid reason, they'll move. If they don't have a valid reason, they'll move. No, if they have a valid reason, let it be. It's just one guy. But if they don't have a valid reason, just be like, would you mind if I go in front? Simple! Or maybe this don't work. Hey, you do it your own way. I'm gonna do my own thing. Interpretation, begin in a friendly way. How would you like to be approached? Simple as that. Chapter 5, The Secrets of Socrates. In talking with people, don't begin by discussing things in which you differ. Begin by emphasizing and keep on emphasizing the things on which you both agree. Keep emphasizing, if possible, that you are both striving for the same end, but the only difference is the method you go about to get to that end. Get the other person saying yes, yes at the outset. Keep him from saying no if possible. A no response, says Professor Overstreet in his book Influencing Human Behavior, is the most difficult handicap to overcome. Because when a person says no, his whole body, his whole muscular system, his whole neuropsychological terror tells him to withdraw, tells him to, nah, this ain't it. But if you make him say yes, it does quite the opposite. It does contrary to what the other thing does. So, if you make him say yes, he opens himself up. He's like, oh, I see. This is a very simple technique. This is the yes response. And yet, how much it is neglected. It often seems as if people get a sense of their own importance by antagonizing at the outset. The radical comes into conference with the conservative brethren, and immediately he must take them furiously. The hell that means. It is a very simple technique, this yes response, and yet how much it is neglected. Speak English! People get their own importance by arguing with other people, so if you start with yes response, you stand out and they'll be more inclined to accept your differences, to accept your point of view. Here's an example of the yes technique by one of the bank people. This man came in to open an account, said Mr. Albertson, and I gave him our usual form to fill out. Some of the questions he answered willingly, but there were others he flatly refused to answer. Before I began to study human relations, I should have told him that if he refused to give the bank information, we should have refused to accept his account. I'm ashamed, and I have been guilty of doing that very thing in the past. Naturally, an ultimatum like this made me feel good. I had to show who was boss. that the bank rules and regulations couldn't be flouted. But that sort of attitude certainly didn't give the feeling of welcome and importance to the man who had walked in to give us his patronage. Give us his money.
Money.
I resolved this morning to use a little horse sense. I resolved not to talk about what the bank wanted, but what about the customer wanted. And above all else, I was determined to get him saying yes, yes, from the very start. So I agreed with him, and I told him the information he refused to give was not absolutely necessary. However, I said, suppose you have money in the bank at your death. Wouldn't you like to have the bank transfer it to the next of kin who is entitled to your according law? Yes, of course, he replied. Don't you think, I continued, that it would be a good idea to give us the name of your next of kin so that in the event of your death, we can carry out your wishes without error or delay? Again, he said yes. The young man's attitude softened and changed when he realized that we weren't asking for this information for our own sake, but for his sake. Before leaving the bank, this young man not only gave me complete information about himself, but he opened, at my suggestion, a trust account naming his mother as the beneficiary for his account. And he gladly answered any questions concerning his mother also. And he gave me his mother's phone number. Simple. So, interpretation. Get the other person saying yes immediately, and it's psychological, some sort of trick which makes them say yes for the next few questions, make them more agreeable. See, making them say yes makes them more agreeable for the next thing you want to talk about. Simple, but make the transition seamless. Don't do no clunky transitions. Chapter 6, the safety valve in handling complaints. Most people, when trying to win others to their way of thinking, do too much talking. Salesmen especially are guilty of this costly error. Let the other man talk himself out. He knows more about his business and his problems than you do. So ask him questions. Let him tell you a few things. If you disagree with him, you may be tempted to interrupt, but don't do it. It's dangerous. He might touch you up. He won't pay any attention to you while he still has a lot of ideas of his own, crying for expression. So listen patiently with an open mind, be sincere about it, encourage him to express his ideas fully. Does this policy pay in business? Let's see. Here's a story of a man who was forced to try it. A few years ago, one of the largest automobile manufacturers in the United States was negotiating for a year requirements of upholstery fabrics. 3 important manufacturers had worked up fabrics in the same bodies. These had all been inspected by executives of the motor company, and notice had been sent to each manufacturer saying on a certain day his representative would be given an opportunity of making his full plea for the contract. GBR, a representative of one manufacturer, arrived in town with a severe attack of laryngitis. I do not know what that is. When it came my turn to meet the executives in the conference, Mr. R said, as he related the story before one of my classes, I had lost my voice. I could hardly whisper. I was ushered into the room and found myself face to face with the textile engineer, the purchasing agent, and the director of sales, and the president of the company. I stood up, made a valiant effort to speak, but couldn't do anything more than squeak. They were all seated around the table, so I wrote on a pad of paper, Gentlemen, I have lost my voice. I am speechless. I'll do the talking for you, the president said. He did. He exhibited my samples and praised their good points. The lively discussion arose about the merits of my goods, and the president, since he was talking for me, took my side during the discussion. My sole participation consisted of smiles, nods, and a few gestures. As a result of this unique conference, I was awarded the contract which called for over 500,000 yards of upholstery fabrics at an exaggerated value of 1,600,000. The biggest order I have ever received. I know I should have lost the contract if I hadn't lost my voice. I had the wrong idea about the whole proposition. I had discovered, quite by accident, how richly sometimes it pays to let the other man do the talking. Let the other man convince himself. Let him talk his way. Let him do his own thinking. Because let's be real, nobody likes to be told, this is how you think. Don't do this. Because they have their own ideas and they want to be like, nah, I'm better than you. I know more. You idiot. Anyway, my interpretation, let the other man do the great deal of talking. For example, if you're in an argument and you know you are right, don't say he is wrong. Just tell him some facts. And if he listens, cool. If he don't, he dumb. He's stupid. Why are you even talking to him? Maybe he's like a friend. Maybe he's family. Idiot. Tell him straight up. Actually, don't. You make your own choices. I ain't telling you shit. Chapter 7. How to get cooperation. Don't you have much more faith in ideas that you discover for yourself than in ideas that are handed to you on a silver platter? If so, isn't it a bad judgment to try ram your opinions down the throats of other people? Wouldn't it be wiser to make suggestions and let the other man think out the conclusion for himself? To illustrate, Mr. Adolf Schals of Philadelphia, a student of one of my courses, suddenly found himself confronted with the necessity of injecting enthusiasm into the discouraged and disorganized group of automobile salesmen. Calling a sales meeting, he urged his men to tell him exactly what they expected from him. As they talked, he wrote down their ideas on a blackboard, like this. He then said, I'll give you all these qualities you expect from me. Now, I want you to tell me what I have the right to expect from you. The replies came quick and fast. Loyalty, honesty, initiative, optimism, teamwork, 8 hours a day of enthusiastic work. One man volunteered to work 14 hours a day. Yeah, he's just sucking. The meeting ended with a new courage, new inspiration, and Mr. Schwartz reported to me that the increase of sales had been phenomenal. The men had made a sort of moral bargain with me, said Mr. Schultz. And as long as I lived up to my part in it, they were determined to live up to theirs. Consulting them about their wishes and desires was just the shot in the arm they needed. No man likes to feel that he is being sold something or told to do a thing. We much prefer to feel that we are buying of our own accord or acting on our own ideas. We like to be consulted about our wishes, our wants, our thoughts. For example, take the case of Eugene Wesson. He lost countless thousands of dollars in commissions before he had learned the truth. Mr. Wilson sells sketches for a studio that creates designs for stylists and textile manufacturers. Mr. Wilson had called once a week, every week, for 3 years, on one of the leading stylists in New York. He never refused to see me, said Mr. Wilson, but he never bought. He always looked over my sketches very carefully and then said, Nah, Wilson, you trash. I guess we don't get together today. After 150 failures, Wilson realized he must be in a mental rut. So he learned more about human psychology, human behavior, and after that he came back brand new. He had brand new. Presently, he was stimulated to try a new approach. Picking up a half a dozen unfinished sketches the artists were working on, he rushed over to the New York buyer's office and told him, I want you to do me a little favor, if you will, he said. Here are some uncompleted sketches. Won't you please tell me how we could finish them up in such a way that they would be of service to you? The buyer looked at the sketches for a while without uttering a word, and then he said, Leave these with me for a few days, Wilson, and then come back to see me. Wilson returned 3 days later and got suggestions, took the sketches back to the studio, and then finished according to the buyer's ideas. The result? He accepted all of them. Here comes the money! Money, 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 dollar, 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 cha-ching, cha-ching. That was 9 months ago. Since that time, the buyer has ordered scores of other sketches, all drawn according to his ideas, and the net result has been more than $1,600 in commission for Wilson. I now realize why I failed for years to sell this buyer, said Mr. Wilson. I had urged him to buy what I thought he ought to have. I did the very opposite now. I urge him to give me his ideas. He feels now that he is creating the designs, and he is. I don't have to sell him now. He buys on his own. So my interpretation, let the other person think that the idea was his. Here's an example of that in the book. 25 centuries ago, Lao Tzu, a Chinese sage, said some things that the readers of this book might use today. The reasons why rivers and seas receive the homage of 100 mountain streams is that they keep below them. Thus, they are able to reign over the mountain streams. So, the sage, wishing to be above men, putteth himself below them. Wishing to be before them, he putteth himself behind them. Thus, though his place be above men, they do not feel his weight. Though his place be before them, they do not count it as an injury. People don't want you to be in front. They want you to be in the back. In simple terms, people are just selfish. It's just facts. It is just true. Unless you some saint. Unless you even then, you might be a bit retarded. Like, come on now. Come on. You really? Nah. You're retarded. Chapter 8. A formula that will work wonders for you. Remember that the other man may not be totally wrong, but he doesn't. Chapter 8. A formula that will work wonders for you. Remember that the other man may be totally wrong, but he doesn't think so. Don't condemn him. Any fool can do that. Try to understand him. Only wise, tolerant, and exceptional men. Oh. Nah, man. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. There is a reason why the other man thinks and acts the way he does. Ferret out the hidden reason and you have the key to his actions, perhaps his personality. Try to honestly put yourself in his place. If you say to yourself, how would I feel? How would I react if I was in his shoes? You will save a lot of time and irritation. For becoming interested in the cause, we are less likely to dislike the effect. And in addition, you will sharply increase your skills in human relations. Stop a minute to contrast your keen interest in your own affairs with your mild concern about anything else. Realize then that everybody else in the world feels the exact same way. Then, along with Lincoln and Roosevelt, you will have grasped the only solid foundation for any job other than warden in a penitentiary. Namely, that in success in dealing with people depends on the sympathetic grasp of the other man's viewpoint. Interpretation. Try to honestly see things from the other person's point of view. This can help you in every situation. For example, you're trying to convince someone on this one topic. Try to honestly see it from their point of view. You just a random guy coming telling you, oh, this good. Why would they trust you? Why would they care? They don't care. So, see it from their point of view. Be interested in them maybe. Gain their trust, because without trust, you ain't gonna get anywhere in convincing them this way, that way, this way. So, imagine yourself in their shoes. Simple. Chapter 9. What everybody wants. Wouldn't you like to have a magic phrase that would stop argument, eliminate ill feeling, and create goodwill, and make the other person listen attentively? Yes, alright. Here it is. Begin by saying, I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I should be undoubtedly feeling the same way as you do. An answer like this will soften the most cantankerous old cuss alive. And you can say that and be 100% sincere, because if you were in the other person's shoes, of course, you would feel just as he does. Let me illustrate. Take Al Capone for one example. Suppose you had inherited the same body, the same temperament and mind that Al Capone inherited. Suppose you had his environment and his experiences. You would then be precisely what he is, and where he is, for it is those things and those things alone that made him what he is. The only reason you are no rattlesnake is because your mother and father weren't rattlesnakes. The only reason you don't kiss cows, consider snakes holy, is because you weren't born in a Hindu family on the banks of Brahmaputra. You deserve very little credit for being what you are. And remember, the man who comes to you irritated, bigoted, unreasoning, deserves very little discredit for being what he is. Feel sorry for the poor devil. Pity him. Sympathize with him. Say to yourself what John G. Gall used to say when he saw a drunken bum staggering down the street. There but for the grace of God I go. What? 3/4 of people you will meet tomorrow are hungry and thirsty for sympathy. Give it to them and they will love you. That's facts. That's fact. Everybody wants sympathy. Everybody wants it. I once gave a broadcast about the author of The Little Women, Louisa May Alcott. Naturally, I knew she had lived and written her immortal books in Concord, Massachusetts. But without thinking what I was saying, I spoke of visiting our old home in Concord, New Hampshire. If I had said New Hampshire only once, it might have been forgiven. But alas, alack, I said it twice. I was deluged with letters, telegrams, sting messages swirled around my defenseless head like a swarm of hornets. Many were indignant, a few insulting. One Colonel Dam, who had been reared in Concord, Massachusetts, who had thus been living in Philadelphia, vented his scorching wrath upon me. She couldn't have been much more bitter if I had accused Miss Alcott of being a cannibal from New Guinea. As I read this letter, I said to myself, thank God I'm not married to that girl. I felt like writing and telling her that although I had made a mistake in geography, she had made a far greater mistake in common courtesy. That was to be just my opening sentence. Then I was going to roll up my sleeves and tell her what I really thought. But I didn't. I controlled myself. I realized that any hot-headed fool could do that. Just as most fools do that, I wanted to be above those fools. Be better! I resolved to try turn our hostility into friendliness. That would be a challenge, a sort of game I could play. I said to myself, after all, if I was she, I would probably feel the same way she does. So, determined to sympathize with her viewpoint, the next time I was in Philadelphia, I called her on the telephone. The conversation went something like this. Miss So-and-so, you wrote me a letter a few weeks ago, and I want to say thank you for it. She, in an inclusive, cultured, well-bred tone,
To whom do I have the honor of speaking?
I'm a stranger to you, miss. I'm Dale Carnegie. You listened to my broadcast about Louisa May Alcott a few Sundays ago, and I made the unforgivable blunder of saying she had lived in Concord, New Hampshire. It was a stupid blunder, and I want to apologize for it. It was nice of you to take time to write to me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Carnegie. I wrote as I did. I lost my temper. I must apologize.
No. You not have to apologize. I'm the one who need to apologize. Any school child would have known better than I had said. I had apologized over the air the Sunday, and I wanted to apologize to you personally now.
I was born in Concord, Massachusetts. My family has been prominent Massachusettsers for 2 centuries. I am very proud of my native state. I am really quite distressed in hearing you say Miss Alcott was born in New Hampshire, but I am really ashamed of my letter.
I assure you that you are not 1/10 as distressed as I am. My error didn't hurt Massachusetts, but it did hurt me. It is so seldom that people of your standing and culture take the time to write people who speak on the radio, and I do hope you will write me again if you detect an error in my talks.
You know, I really like very much the way you have accepted my criticism. You must be a very nice person.
I should like to know you better. So, by apologizing and sympathizing with our viewpoint, I got out apologizing and sympathizing with my viewpoint. I had the satisfaction of controlling my temper and the satisfaction of returning kindness for an insult. I got indefinitely more real fun out of making her like me than I could ever have gotten out in making her dislike me. Interpretation: be sympathetic to the other person's ideas and desires, because you'll be exactly like them if you were in their situation, if you were in their environment, if you were clapped. Imagine you're talking to someone clapped and they're really angry to you. You would just be like them if they were you, and they would be just like you if you were them. Sympathize with them. Everybody likes it. Sympathize with people. Understand. Be understanding. Chapter 10. An appeal that everybody likes. I was reared on the edge of Jesse James's country out in Missouri, and I visited Jesse James's farm at Carnegie, Missouri, where the son of Jesse James is still living. His wife told me stories of how Jesse robbed trains and held up banks, and then gave the money to the neighboring farmers to pay off their mortgages. Jesse James probably regarded himself as an idealist at heart, just as Dutch Schwartz, Two Gun Crawley, and Al Capone did 2 generations later. The fact is that every man you meet, even the man you see in the mirror, has high regard of himself and likes to be fine and unselfish in his own estimation. J. Pierpont Morgan observed in one of his analytical interludes that a man usually has 2 reasons for doing a thing. One that sounds good and a real one. The man himself would think of the real reason. You don't need to emphasize that. But all of us, being idealists at heart, like to think of the motives that sound good. So, in order to change people, appeal to the nobler motives. Is that too idealistic to work in business? Let's see. Let's take the case of Hamilton J. Farrell of the Farrell Mitchell Company of Gillendon, Pennsylvania. Mr. Farrell had a disgruntled tenant who threatened to move. The tenant's lease still had 4 months to run. At $55 a month, nevertheless, he served a notice that he was vacating immediately, regardless of the lease. These people had lived in my house all winter, the most expensive part of the year, Mr. Farrell said as he told the story to the class. And I knew it would be difficult to rent the apartment again before fall. I could see $220 going through over the hill, and believe me, I saw red. Now, ordinarily, I would have waded into the tenant and advised him to read his lease again. I would have pointed out that if he moved, the full balance of his rent would fall due at once, and that I could and would move to collect. However, instead of flying off the handle and making a scene, I decided to try the other tactic. So, I started like this. Mr. Doe, I said, I had listened to your story, and I still don't believe you intend to move. Years in the renting business have taught me something about the human nature, and I sized you up in the first place as being a man of your word. In fact, I'm so sure of it, I'm willing to take the gamble. Now, here's my proposition. Lay your decision on the table for a few days and think it over. If you come back to me between now and the 1st of the month, when your rent is due, and tell me you still intend to move, I will privilege you to move, and admit to myself I've been wrong in my judgment. But I still believe you're a man of your word, and I will live up to your contract. For after all, we're either men or monkeys, and the choice usually lies within ourselves. Well, when the new month came around, this gentleman came and paid his rent in person, and he and his wife had talked it over, he said, and decided to stay. They had concluded that the only honorable thing to do was to live up to their lease. Interpretation, appeal to people's nobler motives. So, I've actually used this in the past. So, my friend was late to the gym, and I told him, I don't think you are a liar. And that appealed to his nobler motive, because when someone calls you a liar, you're like, I ain't no liar. I never lie. And the next time, guess what? I was late, not him. See? Appeal to the nobler motives. There's better examples, I'm just spazzing. Chapter 11. The movies do it, radio does it, why don't you do it? A few years ago, the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin was slandered by a dangerous whispering campaign. A malicious rumor was being circulated. Advertisers were being told the newspaper carried too much advertising and too little news, that it was no longer attractive to readers. Immediate action was necessary. The gossip had to be squashed. But how? This is the way it was done. The bulletin clipped from its regular edition all reading matter of all kinds on an average day and classified it, and published it as a book. The book was called One Day. It contained 307 pages, as many as a $2 book. Yet, the bulletin had printed all the news and feature material on one day and sold it, not for $2, but for 2 cents. The printing of that book dramatized the fact that the bulletin carried an enormous amount of interesting reading matter. It conveyed the fact more vividly, more interestingly, more impressively than days of figures and mere talk could have done. Read Showmanship in Business by Kenneth Good and Zen Kaufman. An exciting phenomenon of how showmen are ringing the cash register. It tells how electric sells refrigerators by lighting matchsticks to prospects is to dramatize the silence of the refrigerators. Interpretation: if you want to convince someone, if you want to show the two difference between two ideas, dramatize your ideas. Exaggerate it. You're selling a computer, but this computer's special factor is that it is silent. So, you can use this technique. You can get a piece of paper and scrape it on your hand and do it right next to the computer, so the person you're trying to sell it to knows that the computer is so silent you can even scrape a piece of paper and hear it. See? Smart! Dramatize your ideas. Chapter 12. When nothing else works, try this. Charles Schwab had a mill manager whose men weren't producing their quota of work. How is it, Schwab asked, that a man as capable as you can't make this mill turn around to what it should be? I don't know, the man replied. I coaxed the men, I pushed them, I've sworn and cussed at them, I threatened them with damnation and being fired, but nothing works. They won't proceed. It happened to be the end of the day just before the night shift came on. Give me a piece of chalk, Schwab asked. Then turning to the nearest man, he asked, how many heats did your shift make today? 6. Without another word, Schwab chalked a big figure of 6 on the wall and walked away. When the night shift came in, they saw the 6 and asked what it meant. The big boss was here today, the man said. He asked how many heaps we made, and we told him 6. He chalked it down on the floor. The next morning, Schwab walked through the mill again. The night shift had rubbed out the 6 and replaced it with a 7. When the day shift reported for work the next morning, they saw a big 7 chalked on the floor. So, the night shift thought they were better than the day shift, did they? Well, they would show the night shift a thing or two. They pitched in with enthusiasm, and when they quit that night, they left behind them the enormous, swaggering 10. Shortly after, this mill that had been lagging way behind in production was turning out more work than any other mill in the plant. The principle? Let Charles Schwab explain in his own words. The way to get things done, Schwab says, is to stimulate competition. I do not mean in a sordid money-getting way, but in a desire to excel. The desire to excel, the challenge, throwing down the gauntlet, an unfadable way of appealing to man's spirit. Without a challenge, nothing is possible. If you want someone to do something, throw down a challenge. Interpretation, challenge people if you want them to do something. For example, play rock, paper, scissors. Tell them they're weak. Tell them they don't know stuff. Challenge accepted. Boom. Part 4. 9 ways to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. Chapter 1. If you must find fault, this is the way to begin. A friend of mine was a guest at the White House for a weekend during the administration of Calvin Coolidge. Drifting into President's private office, he heard Coolidge say to one of his secretaries, "That's a pretty dress you're wearing this morning. You're a very attractive young woman." That was probably the most effluent praise Silent Cal has ever bestowed upon his secretary in his life. It was so unusual, so unexpected that the girl blushed in confusion. Then Coolidge said, "Now, don't get stuck up. I just said that to make you feel good. From now on, I wish you would be a little more careful with your punctuation." His method was probably a bit obvious, but the psychology was superb. It is always easier to listen to unpleasant things after we heard some praise for our good points. A barber lathers a man before he shaves him. And that is precisely what McKinley did back in 1896 when he was running for president. One of the prominent Republicans of the day had written a campaign speech that he felt was just a trifle better than Cicerone and Patrick Henry and Daniel Webster all rolled in one. With a great glee, this chap read his immortal speech aloud to McKinney. The speech had its fine points, but it just wouldn't do. It would have raised a tornado of criticism. McKinney didn't want to hurt this man's feelings. He must not kill the man's splendid enthusiasm. And yet, he had to say no. Note how adroitly he did it. "My friend, that is a splendid speech, a magnificent speech," McKinney said. "No one could have prepared a better one. There are many occasions on which it would have been precisely the right thing to say, but it is quite suitable to this particular occasion. Sound and sober as it was from the standpoint, I must consider its effect from the party standpoint. Now you go home and write a speech along the lines I indicate and send me a copy of it." He did it, and McKinney blue penciled and helped him rewrite the second speech, and he became one of the most effective speakers of the campaign. Interpretation: if you got to tell them some improvements, begin with praise and honest appreciation, because that will make it easier for them to listen to the criticism. Chapter 2. How to criticize and not be hated for it. Charles Schwab was passing through one of his steel mills one day at noon when he came across one of his employees smoking. Immediately above their heads was a sign which said, "No smoking." Did Schwab point a sign and say, "Can't you read?" Oh no, not Schwab. He walked over to the man, handed each one of them a cigar and said, "I'd appreciate it, boys, if you will smoke these on the outside." He knew that they had broken a rule, and they admired him because he said nothing about it and gave them a little present that made them feel important. Couldn't keep him from loving a man like that. Couldn't keep from loving a man like that, could you? John Wanamaker used the same technique. Wanamaker used to make a tour of his great store in Philadelphia every day. Once he saw a customer waiting a counter. No one was paying the slightest attention to her. The salespeople, they were in a huddle at the far end of the counter, laughing and talking among themselves. Wanamaker didn't say a word. Quietly, slipping behind the counter, he waited on the woman himself, and then handed the purchase to the salespeople to be wrapped as he went on his way. Interpretation: to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly, subtly. Not straight up. Chapter 3. Talk about your own mistakes first. A few years ago, my niece Josephine Carnegie left her home in Kansas City to come to New York and to act as my secretary. She was 19, had graduated from high school 3 years previously, and her business experience was a trifle more than zero. Today, she is one of the most perfect secretaries in the West's ways, but in the beginning, she was well susceptible to improvement. One day when I started to criticize her, I said to myself, "Just a minute, Dale. Just a minute. You are twice as old as Josephine. You have 10,000 times as much as business experience. How can you possibly expect her to have your viewpoint? Your judgment, your initiative. Mediocre they may be." And just a minute, Dale. What were you doing at 19? Remember the asinine mistakes, the fool blunders you made? Remember the time you did this and that? After thinking the matter over, honestly and impartially, I concluded that Josephine's average betting at 19 was much better than mine had been. And that, I'm sorry to confess, isn't playing Josephine much a compliment. So after that, when I wanted to call Josephine's attention to the mistake, I used to begin by saying, "You have made a mistake, Josephine, but the Lord knows it's no worse than many I have made. You were not born with judgment that comes only with experience, and you are better than I was at your age. I have been guilty of many stupid, silly things myself. I have little inclination to criticize you or anyone. But don't you think it would have been wiser if you had done so and so?" It isn't nearly so difficult to listen to the recital of your own faults if the criticizer begins by humbly admitting that he too is far from impeccable. Interpretation: talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Chapter 4. No one likes to take orders. I recently had the pleasure of dining with Miss Ida Tarabell, the Dean of American Biographies. When I told her I was writing a book, we began discussing on the all-important subject of getting along with people. And she told me that while she was writing a biography of O&D Young, she interviewed a man who had sat for 3 years in the same office with Mr. Young. This man declared that during all the time he had never heard O&D Young give a direct order to anyone. He always gave suggestions, not orders. O&D Young never said, for example, "Do this, do that," or "Do this, don't do that, don't do this." He would say, "You might consider," or "Do you think that would work?" Frequently, he would say, after he had dictated a letter, "What do you think of this?" In looking over the letter of one of his assistants, he would say, "Maybe if we were to phrase it this way, it would be better." He always gave a person the opportunity to do things himself. He never told his assistants to do things. He let them do them, let them learn from their mistakes. A technique like this makes it easy for a person to correct his error. A technique like this saves a man's pride and gives him a feeling of importance. It makes him want to cooperate instead of rebel. So, interpretation. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Nobody likes to be told, so just give them question them. Psychology. Chapter 5. Let the other man save his face. Years ago, General Electric Company was faced with the delicate task of removing Charles Schweinsness from the head of department. Steinmetz, a genius of the first magnitude when it came to electricity, was a washout at the head of the calculating department. Yet the company didn't dare offend this man, and he was indispensable and highly sensitive. So they gave him a new title. They made him the consulting engineer of the General Electric Company. A new title for work he was already doing, and let someone else head up the department. Steinmetz was happy, so were the officers of the GE. So were the officers of the GE. They had gently maneuvered their most temporal star, and they had done it without a storm. By letting him save his face. Letting him save his face. How important, how vitally important that is. And how few of us ever stop to think of it. We ride roughshod over the feelings of others, getting our own way, finding fault, issuing threats, criticizing a child or employee in front of others, without even considering the hurt on the other person's pride. Whereas a few minutes' thought and consideration, word or two, genuine understanding of the other person's attitude, will go so far towards alleviating that sting. Interpretation. Let the other man save his face. For example, you can do this in a situation where someone maybe don't know what to do on the computer. They're like clicking on random stuff. They're stupid. But let them save their face. Go up to them quietly and tell them, me, this is how you do it. And they will be able to do it, and they won't damage their pride. Chapter 6. How to spur men on to success. I used to know Pete Barlow. Pete had a dog and a Pontiac, and he spent his life traveling with circuses and vaudeville shows. I loved to watch Pete train his new dogs for his act. I noticed that the moment the dog showed the slightest improvement, Pete patted and praised and gave them meat and made a great to-do about it. That's nothing new. Animal training have been using the same technique for centuries. Why, I wonder, we don't use the same common sense when trying to change people? Why, I wonder, don't we use the same common sense when trying to change people that we use when we use to change dogs? Praise even the slightest improvement. That inspires the other fellow to keep improving. Warden E. Lewis Laws has found that praising the slightest improvement pays, even with the crime-haunted men of Sing Sing. I have found, Warden Laws said in the letter which I received while writing this chapter, that the voicing of proper appreciation for the efforts of the inmates secures greater results in obtaining their cooperation and furthering their ultimate rehabilitation than harsh criticism and condemnation for their delinquencies. I have never been incarcerated in Sing Sing, at least not yet, but I look back at my own life and see where a few words of praise have sharply changed my entire future. Can't you say the same thing about your life? History is replete with striking illustrations for the sheer witchery of praise. For example, half a century ago, a boy was working in a factory in the Naples. He longed to be a singer, but the first teacher discouraged him. "You can't sing," he said. "You have no voice. It sounds like the wind in the shutters." But his mother, a poor peasant woman, put her arms around him and praised him and told him she knew he could sing. She could already see the improvement, and she went barefoot in order to save money to pay for his music lessons. That peasant mother praise and encouragement changed that boy's life. You may have heard of him. His name was Caruso. I have not heard of him. Interpretation: praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. So, if you want to see some improvement in somebody, praise their improvement. That's just the way it is. You can think back to your own improvements. That's how it is. Someone says, "Ooh, you can run." And then you're like, "Yeah, I can run." Chapter 7. Give the dog a good name. A friend of mine, Mr. Ernest, hired a servant girl, telling her to report for work the following Monday. In the meantime, Mr. Gent telephoned a woman who had formerly employed this girl. All was not well. When the girl came to start work, Mr. Gent said, "Nellie, I telephoned the other day to a woman who you used to work for. She said you were honest, reliable, a good cook, and good at caring for the children. But she also said you were sloppy and never kept the house clean." Now, I think she was lying. You dress neatly. Anybody can see that. And I'll bet you keep the house just as neat and clean as your persons. You and I are going to get along just fine. And they did. Nellie had a reputation to live up to. And believe me, she did live up to it. She kept the house shining. She would gladly have scrubbed and dusted an extra hour a day rather than to be untrue to Mr. Gent's ideal of her. The average man, said Samuel Villucoon, president of the Baldwin Limis Shune Works, can be led readily if you have his respect, and if you show him that you respect him for some kind of ability. In short, if you want to improve a person in a certain respect, act as though their particular trait was already one of his outstanding characteristics. Shakespeare said, "Assume a virtue if you have it not." And it might be well to assume and state openly that the other party has the virtue you want him to develop. Give him a fine reputation to live up to, and he will make prodigious effort rather than to see you disillusioned. Interpretation: give a man a fine reputation to live up to. Chapter 8. Make the fault seem easy to correct. A short time ago, a bachelor friend of mine, about 40 years old, became engaged, and his fiancée persuaded him to take some belated dancing lessons. "The Lord knows I needed dancing lessons," he confessed, as he told me the story, "for I danced just as I did when I was first started 20 years ago. The first teacher I engaged probably told me the truth. She said I was all wrong. I would have just to forget everything and begin all over again. But that took the heart out of me. I had no incentive to go on. So, I quit her. The next teacher may have been lying, but I liked it. She said nonchalantly that my dancing was a bit old-fashioned perhaps, but the fundamentals were there, and it was alright. And she assured me that I wouldn't have any trouble in learning a few more steps. The first teacher had discouraged me by emphasizing my mistakes. The new teacher did the opposite. She kept praising the things I did right and minimizing the errors. "You have a natural sense of rhythm," she assured me. "You are a natural-born dancer." Now, my common sense tells me I have always been and always will be a fourth-rate dancer. Yet deep in my heart, I still like to think that maybe she meant it. To be sure, I was paying her to say it, but why bring that up? At any rate, I know I'm a better dancer than I would have been if she hadn't told me I had a natural sense of rhythm. That encouraged me. That gave me hope. That made me want to improve. Tell a child, a husband, or an employee that he is stupid or dumb at a certain thing, that he has no gift for it, that he is doing it all wrong, and you have destroyed almost every incentive to try and improve. But the opposite technique, be liberal with your encouragement, make the thing seem easy to do. Let the other person know that you have a faith in his ability to do it, that he has undeveloped flair for it, and then he will practice until dawn comes at the window in order to excel. Interpretation: use encouragement. Make the fault you want to correct seem easy to correct. Make the thing you want the other person to do seem easy to do. Chapter 9. Making people glad to do what you want. Back in 1915, America was aghast For more than a year, the nations of Europe had been slaughtering one another on a scale never seen before. Could peace be brought about? No one knew. But Woodrow Wilson determined to try. He would send personal representatives at a peace embassy to counsel with the warlords in Europe. William Jean Bryan, Secretary of State, Bryan's the peace advocate, longed to go. He saw a chance to perform a great service and make his name immortal. But Wilson appointed another man, his intimate friend, Colonel House. And it was House's thorny task to break the unwelcome news to Bryan without giving him offense. Bryan was distinctly disappointed when he heard I was to go to Europe as a peace embassy. Colonel House recorded in his diary, he said he had planned to do this himself. I replied that the president thought it would be too unwise for anyone to do this officially, that his goings would attract a great deal of attention and people would wonder, why is he there? You see the intermission? House practically tells Bryan that he is too important for this job, and Bryan is satisfied. Colonel House, experienced in the ways of the world, was the following one of the most important rules of human relations. Always make the other man happy about doing the thing you suggest. Woodrow Wilson followed that policy even when inviting William Gibbs to become the member of his cabinet. That was the highest honor he could confer upon anyone, and yet Wilson did it in such a way to make the other man feel doubly important. Here is the story of McAdoo's own word. He said he was making up his cabinet and that he would be very glad if I would accept a place in his Secretary of the Treasury. He had a delightful way of putting things. He created an impression that by accepting this great honor, I would be doing him a favor. Unfortunately, Wilson didn't always employ such tact. If he had, history might have been different. For example, Wilson didn't make the Senate and the Republican Party happy about putting the United States in the League of the Nations. I don't know what this is. But anyway, my interpretation made the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. There you go. There is a part 5, but I'll tell you in a nutshell what it is. So, 7 rules for making your home life happier. Don't nag. Don't try to make your part. Don't try to change the other person. Don't criticize. Give honest appreciation. Pay a little attention. Be courageous. And read good books on smashing. Alright. That is How to Win Friends and Influence People. The whole book. There you go. I have read the whole thing. If you like and you want to see more, smash subscribe, comment, and like. Alright. Try to do some of those things. Alright? Let's shake on it. Okay. Goodbye.